everyone. My name is Lori Howerson. For those who don't know me, I am a Vistage chair and an executive business coach. And I am an prior executive, having led teams of about 800 people around the world. And I'm here with John Grover, who is the CEO of Spark House. And today we're going to be talking about strategy and specifically about human capital strategy. And so, John, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself before we dive in?
Great. Thanks, Lori, for putting this together, by the way, for everyone. I appreciate that. As Lori said, my name is John Grover, and I run a company called Spark House. It's a human capital consulting firm. And one of the things that we do is we connect people strategy with the business strategy. And so my background is in operations. I've been a CEO of a $50 million company. I've been a chief human resource officer of numerous large companies. I've started companies. I've sold companies. And so I've been around a long while. And part of my expertise is figuring out how does the people piece get put in place in order to support the business objectives and drive the business forward. And a couple of my big successes have been a company called IMES. For those of you who have pets, you'll know that IMES was a pet food company. When I got there, it was a small privately held business. We grew it to over $1 billion in revenues with only 1,200 people, and then we eventually sold that business to P&G for $2.1 billion. So while I was there, I learned a bunch about how do you connect people strategy with business strategy and how do you execute and grow a business. I joined a company called Orange Glow International, which is OxyClean. That was a small family-owned business when I joined. We grew it to over $300 million and sold it to the Church and Dwight folks for $400 million. So those are a few of my claim to fame.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously lots of experience in this area, and I'm really excited to be talking with you today about just strategy, right? I'm going to share really quickly because we know that strategy is not a plan. A lot of people think, oh, I have a plan and it's tactical, but it's not really a strategy. So I'm just going to share really quickly an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So when you think about the strategy, a lot of people know vision, mission, and then they have what I would call an operational plan versus a strategic plan. And it's interesting the different elements of a strategy. Like we have here financial and operation planning, marketing and sales. A lot of people may or may not have a specific customer strategy. And what I know you're seeing is that a lot of people don't have a human capital strategy. So tell us a little bit about what that is and why it's important to people and kind of what you're seeing when with the companies that you work with, which by the way, I should say, both of us work with small to medium sized businesses. And so this is an area that a lot of people may or may not be thinking about.
Yes. So what I see a lot of are, well, first of all, you've got to have a vision for your company. So that's kind of the lighthouse on the horizon as to where is your business going? What do you want to achieve in this business for yourself, for your customers, for your employees, for all the stakeholders that you have? Where are you going? That's the vision piece of this, and that's important to have. First of all, then a mission, which is what are you trying to do when people come to work every day? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Usually from the vision and the mission comes things like values and those types of things as well. And then that translates into your business strategy. And then we start to do planning around that. Obviously have your financial and operational strategy and plan for how you're going to manage your financial and operational assets. You have a sales and marketing plan for, how are you going to attack the marketplace and how are you going to win in that regard. You have a customer strategy on how you're going to handle folks that you're able to secure and how are you going to make sure that you retain them. And then the piece that I see missing a lot really is this human capital strategy piece. And the reason why this is so important in today's world is because the labor force is changing. There is a lot more regulation today than there has ever been, at least in the 40 years I've been doing this. There is a small labor pool, as we've seen, with baby boomers retiring. There are generational challenges between millennials and Gen Xers and baby boomers. So there's a lot of different perspectives on work in the labor force that is out there. And so small to medium businesses will normally not have somebody like me on staff because frankly I'm too expensive to pay for 40 hours a week. But they need somebody like me to kind of turn on and turn off when they need to help develop the strategy and the plan, the execution behind that. So that is what we do. And one of the things that is really lacking is where are we going to get people from who we need to run the business? First of all, who do we need? And do we need those people to be part-time? Do we need them to be full-time? Do we need them to be contractors? Is it going to be a seasonal labor force?
Yeah.
And then, where am I going to find these people? How am I going to deploy them? How am I going to make sure that they're productive so that we can drive the business forward?
Yeah.
So lots of those pieces there.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the first things that I did when I took over my organization, which I said it was about 800 people, is come up with what we called at the time labor strategy. Now people are saying human capital. But the big thing was what percentage of our workforce do we want full-time on staff versus what percentage of our workforce did we want as ETWs or, temporary labor. And that was important because as a business ebbs and flows, we didn't want to have to like lay off a whole bunch of people. And that was something that we were very conscious about, very considerate to, because, as it affects people's lives when you do that. And the having external workers allowed us some flexibility with, people who understood what that would look like. And more of the possibility. So I think that, and you look at the gig economy, there's like you said, there's a lot of things changing, and what type of workforce do you want is one of the big first questions when you think about this under talent acquisition. So if you're looking at this slide under human capital, if you look down, we're going to talk a little bit about talent acquisition and then move on to the other pieces of, how do you manage the strategy? And then, what are the compensation benefits and rewards and recognition? Another, let's call it unutilized part of a labor or human capital strategy. So John, tell us a little bit more about, talent acquisition, what you're seeing in today's market, what works, what's not working.
So I think what is working is a multi-pronged approach. I call it hunting as well as fishing.
Not heard the fishing one.
Okay. So the hunting one is really, you got to develop, part of your strategy ought to be to have a culture where everybody recruits. So everybody in your company should be thinking about, who do we need on the team and what kinds of people do we need on the team? And they ought to be having business cards that if they run into somebody who they think, wow, that's an excellent person. I think they've got a great skill set. I'd like to have them, come and interview with us. You can hand them a business card. Right. So that's really hunting, using LinkedIn to kind of go through your network and really find people who would fit and reaching out, connecting and hunting the right kinds of people. Right.
Yeah.
And fishing really is your classic recruiting. You're going to put up an ad on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever job board you're going to use, and you're going to fit. So you've got to have good bait. And people have got to understand why they should come and work for you versus other people, because there's less people in the labor market today than there ever has been, and they're more particular. And so it is definitely a seller's market, and you've got to make sure that you've got the right bait out there if you're fishing. You've got to teach your people how to hunt. So as I'm coaching people and as I'm doing recruiting for them, we use both of those tactics pretty regularly.
Yeah. It's interesting because culture and how you project yourself as a company, I think is one thing. And then I think, when you talk about fishing, the other thing that's interesting is, and I'm curious about what you're seeing is like in my prior work, we would pay a referral fee to employees, right? So instead of, we had recruiters and different things, but the key was on this hunting piece was really around, paying people to our employees to say, hey, if you find a good candidate and they come on, there was, half now, half later sort of thing. But it was a really great way of bringing in people that you knew who could articulate the values of the company and so
Yes.
yeah. So what do you see in terms of that? Because it can be a lot cheaper in the end than hiring an
Oh,
agency, which I'm not saying don't do.
yeah. Yeah. Again, it does go but kind of tie back to your culture because if you have a culture of trusting people and you have a culture of wanting to educate them, you'll teach them how to do this kind of recruiting, right? And to me, the referral bonus is simply a result of having a culture where everybody recruits and where we trust people and we try to engage them in running our business.
Yeah.
And so yeah, $1,000, $500 when the person starts, $500 after 60 or 90 days. That's kind of standard, and that can go
Okay.
up or down. Certain hard to find positions can be more. Positions that are easier to find can be less.
Yeah.
So yeah, but companies will put those in place, but then not visit them, not advertise them within the company, depending on how big your company is. You've got to keep those things fresh and out in front of people, and teach people how to do it and how to use it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It worked well for us. So I'm glad to hear that it sounds like it's working well for the people who are implementing that. Like I said, it can be a lot cheaper than what people are doing in other aspects.
Definitely.
What about talent management? So when you think about moving into that, what does that look like? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, to me, talent management is how do we retain people? How do we make sure that they stay with us, right? Um, and so, what I'm finding people want in today's world is obviously they want compensation. We're going to talk about kind of separately, but really the bigger driver is especially younger people. They want to grow. They want to know where they can go in a company. They want to know how can I add to my skill set, my belt, and where can I go in the company? So certainly learning development is a really big piece of that.
Yeah.
Um,
We saw that. We saw
yeah,
that as well around the world. And it honestly didn't matter where you were in the world. It was the same thing. People they wanted to know where they were going, wanted to be promoted.
yeah,
Certain geographies had a little bit more emphasis on that, but that's what I saw around the world as well.
yeah, absolutely.
And when you think about the climate and culture, one of the things like we had a great culture and we knew that because we did culture surveys, we did what we call leadership surveys and employee surveys so that we could get the feedback from people to understand where we were excelling and where we were deficient, what people wanted, that sort of thing. And one of the things is, I'm just curious what you're seeing in the smaller to medium-sized businesses. What are you seeing in terms of culture, where people like what is important, and then where are people struggling? What should they be thinking about as they build the culture and climate that helps keep and retain employees?
Yeah, well, I think you have to tie culture back really to your vision and mission, right? And kind of who are you as a CEO, a leader, business owner,
Mhm.
and what kind of culture do you want to drive, right? And so those questions kind of have to be answered first for your particular business. And then I think that really needs to drive down into the different strategies. And there's as many cultures and climates as there are companies, right? Each one is a little unique, each one is a little bit different.
Mhm.
But it's important to be honest with yourself and tell, and document what yours really is.
Yeah.
And that isn't
Yeah.
the words that are hanging up on the wall with your vision and mission. It's how really do people treat each other? How do they interact with each other? How do they interact with the outside world? What is important for you to function day to day in your business?
Yeah.
And it's really important to be kind of truthful with those types of things,
Yeah.
and not put people on.
Yeah. One of the great things about being in Vistage is we have speakers like David Friedman, who is like a renowned expert on culture. And one of the things that my members have put in place as a result of him coming and speaking with my groups is a our behaviors, right? He calls them fundamentals, but
Mhm.
what are the behaviors that uphold your values, that uphold your culture? And without those behaviors, you can't coach to those behaviors, right? So when I think about culture, I think about it's a big part of that is having conversations, right? Every decision, every coaching conversation, whether it be to reward people and celebrate them or to give some, corrective feedback and change of direction, is to tie back to your values, to tie back to your strategy, or to tie back to the behaviors. And if you don't have specific behaviors that you can coach to, it's really hard to get people to understand. Like one of my members, uh, their focus is exceptionalism. Well, if you don't coach to what the behaviors are that create exceptionalism, how are people going to know? Right. So,
Yeah, yeah, and I would tell you that should tie back into your values. And so if that's one of your values, you need to define the value in behavioral terms. So
mhm,
all of your
mhm.
values should be described in behavioral terms, right? Like if,
Right,
if you if
absolutely.
if you have a value that is get things done, get results, you ought to then below that define what it means in behavioral terms so that
Yes.
people can read it and go, oh yeah, I act like that, or I don't act like that.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So I
Absolutely.
totally agree.
Yeah. And I think some of those things, if they're missing, you can create subcultures where employees can create subcultures like, oh, administrative tasks are not important to the company, or the company really doesn't value teamwork as an example, because those things aren't talked about. There's not behaviors around them.
Yeah, and I
Um,
and I would tell you my experience both being on a leadership team and coaching leadership teams is the leadership team drives that. And so you can have whatever values and behaviors you want, but what happens is people emulate the leader. So the CEO,
absolutely. Oh,
right?
absolutely.
They emulate the boss is kind of what happens. And so you just want to make sure that when you do have your values and they're defined with behaviors, like that's how the
Yeah.
leadership team is behaving. And if they're not, you need to deal with it. So a lot of things, a lot of times when I'm engaged is that, you do your employee opinion survey in one area
Yeah.
is just bad.
Yeah.
And usually if you trace that up, you'll find it's I have a little saying that it's there are no bad employees, there are only bad leaders. So, either the leader picked the wrong person to join the team, or the leader isn't behaving
Yeah.
according to the values, or the leader hasn't terminated the right person fast enough, or
Right.
whatever the answer
Right.
is. It's
Yeah.
generally a leadership issue, not an employee issue.
Yeah.
Just my experience.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's why there's so much focus these days on leaders and leadership development and investing in yourself as a CEO and in your team as a leader. So yeah, that's fantastic. Um, the other thing is succession planning that I don't see a lot. And I think for the smaller businesses, you know, there's just not enough people. But as you grow your business to, 50, 60, 100 people, those are the times that you need to start putting in succession plans. So any guidance for people who are in that growth trajectory where they're getting big enough
Yeah.
that they have, key employees that would be good to cover.
Yeah, I think it's really important for all businesses over 10 people, probably some under 10 people, for the CEO or the board or the ownership group to be thinking about who's a flight risk, and what would we do if they decide they're leaving? How are we gonna fill that? We're seeing times to fill executive positions in the 90 days area. I actually was on a call just yesterday with Japan. And in Japan, it's 6 to 9 months. to replace an executive person. So,
Yeah. And you want to do it well there because
yeah,
you cannot fire somebody in Japan. So
yeah,
it's very important to get the right person there. I mean, it is anywhere, but
yeah.
definitely
So I
Japan.
would tell you, informal succession planning should be thought about at the board or ownership level, all the way along the line with companies. As it gets bigger, you want to have some sense of who are your key employees, who are the key players here, and you want to know how you're going to replace them. If that person decides to leave, you should have some plans in place, and they don't have to be super formal. And we do stuff at Spark House, from just having conversations around the ownership table about this topic versus actually laying it out and having a matrix and grading people on flight risk versus criticality to the organization, and making sure that we have a succession plan for those highly critical, high flight risk people, so that the business doesn't get caught with its pants down.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I see too is, and I feel very, very strongly that people leave. I mean, there's data that shows us that people leave because of their boss. And especially in a remote environment, it's even more important to have this connection with your boss and a good relationship and one-to-ones. And it's interesting, as the pandemic has shifted things, I think people struggled with, how do I develop people and how do I stay connected with them in a remote environment, and even in general. So one of the things that was an expectation of my leadership team was that everyone would have a sit down at least once a month, closed door, to have one-on-one time, find out what's going on with their people, stay connected on a personal level. And there's a lot of things that are done walking around the floor when you're in the office and that sort of thing. Um, and yet I see a lot of people not having that quality one-to-one time, even if it's 30 minutes, right? Once a month.
Yeah.
I recommend a little bit longer. What do you see? What do you recommend? And what do you see works in today's environment in both the remote and the on office, in
Yeah.
office?
Yeah. And so what I see is everybody's very busy. Right. Leaders are super busy, and kind of what happens is these one-on-ones kind of get, pushed to the bottom of the list.
Absolutely.
Or what the leader does is, we play whack-a-mole, right? When a problem comes up, you're focusing on these problems and you're trying to correct these problems, and you lose sight of these, one-on-ones and communication. And I see people also spend too much time with the problem employees versus time with the stars, right? So then what happens is, the star gets starved of attention, because they're always doing stuff right, they're always taking on extra stuff, and those are the people who end up leaving, right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
what I'm seeing is a lot of coaching going on with managers, people who manage, 1 to 20 people, right?
Yeah.
That they've got to put those one-on-ones on the calendar,
And keep
even,
them.
yes,
Keep them,
and
right?
keep them and make them a priority.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, when they're on the calendar and they get changed and they keep getting pushed back because something else comes up, that sends a message to the employee. And the message is, there's always something more important than talking to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want to do. So, and to me, that's part of organizational development. It really is, communication is part of making the organization better by ensuring everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
And the boss having discussions with, especially their best people, is super important.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not task leaders. we're people leaders, right? And I think, that people part is really critical. One last thing before we move on to compensation, benefits, and rewards, that I want to just throw out there is, one of the things that I instilled in my organization is what we call coach the coach. So sitting in with I would sit in with my staff when they coached their employees, and it really gave me a different perspective. And I would, be back, so I wasn't really in the, view, even though they knew I was there. But it gave me a chance to really see whether people were checking the boxes in their one-to-ones, or if they were truly coaching and listening and wanting to hear what was going on with their employees. And that was something that was really valuable, and it gave me a lot of insight to where that was happening and where people were really listened to and valued, and where they weren't. So just I'll just throw that out before we move on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and another way to do that is have what we call a skip level meeting, right?
absolutely, yes,
And
did
so
those too.
rather than sit there during the discussion, what you could do is go take that employee to lunch and ask your questions that you're kind of ticking off in your mind as you're sitting there.
Yeah,
Just ask the employee, hey, how did that go?
yeah,
How often do you communicate? What kind of gets talked about in those meetings?
right.
And so you can kind of do a skip level meeting either with one person, or you can do the whole group,
Yeah,
and you would be like amazed at what you'll find out. Like
absolutely.
when I was the head of HR in certain companies, I would just grab groups of employees and take them all out to lunch
Mm,
and just ask, just ask some, fairly non-threatening questions. And it would be amazing what you would
yeah,
get. People
great.
tell you if there's an issue, you're gonna find it. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I used to do when I would go around in my regions, I would do lunch with Lori, and I would it was a reward for people who were really great performers or who had done something unique during the time that between my visits, and then they loved that, and I learned a lot about what was going on and subcultures and all of these different things. So yeah,
Yes.
so that that's great. Definitely recommend skip levels, especially as you start moving the business gets expanded. And I know a lot of CEOs who are founders say, well, I don't know how to stay in touch with all my employees. And skip levels is a great way to do that. So let's move on to compensation, benefits, rewards. So talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in that space and what works and what's
Yeah.
missing.
Yeah. First of all, what I'm seeing is these things aren't connected. They're just kind of people throwing darts at a dartboard. Right, there isn't a strategy or thinking behind how do we blend these things and how do we weigh them, and like what's important to people, right? Lots of times an organization will offer what the CEO thinks is the right thing to do because it's important to the CEO, but like what do the people like think? So I'm a big believer in asking them about different benefits, about different rewards, about compensation. Like I'm used to, polling people, or when we do the skip level meetings, throwing out, hey, how do you feel about that new, what would you like to see us do differently in our benefit programs, right? And just listen to people,
Yeah, yeah.
because that's really what's important. So I'm seeing a disconnect between what people value and what the company is offering, and I'm seeing disconnects between compensation, benefits, and rewards that they're
Mhm.
just kind of scattered.
Yeah,
They're just thrown out there. It's a shotgun approach rather than a rifle approach, where we're going to think about how do we spend this money. Because I look at it as a pool of money that we're going to use for the workforce, right?
yeah,
And certainly part of that budget goes into talent management as well when we're doing things like leadership development or things,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
All of your people costs are in kind of one bucket. And so how are we going to take that money and use it most appropriately to number one, drive productivity,
Mhm.
number two, drive retention, and three, have a happy workforce, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah,
I would say a satisfied workforce.
Yeah,
I don't,
satisfied.
happiness is an individual thing. So I've always
Satisfied.
said people who are satisfied
Satisfied.
with their job. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And excel.
I think connecting all of those things and managing it, and really thinking about managing people like an asset, like your CFO would think about managing financial assets. You really need somebody to be thinking about how do you manage the human capital
Mhm.
assets. And again, a
Mhm.
large part of that is comp benefits and rewards,
Yeah.
right? So having some method and logic behind what you're doing in those areas is super important, and tying them together and making sure that it's what people want, and it's competitive, and it's helping you retain the types of people that you want.
Yeah. But in my experience, rewards, what we called R&R, rewards and recognition, are a huge part of that. And that doesn't have to cost anything, right? I mean, there are everything from like in Singapore, the team had QR codes and they could give these QR codes to their peers. Like it was a peer-to-peer recognition. And then they would win something. They were actually on a little piece of paper and they could scratch them off and win $5 or, whatever it was. And so people were very creative in how they both did these non-monetary rewards and also official ones. Like, a year service, 5-year service, 20-year service awards. And I've got a couple folks that I coach who are putting those things into place that they hadn't had before. And people are going crazy. I mean, they love it. They want to be recognized, whether it's a card, whether it's and one of the things that, as we talked about this in one of our Vistage meetings, that people love is sending something to somebody's house, right? A gift card. And I know my husband gets those every once in a while from his company or his customers even. And it's great because I know that they think he's doing a fantastic job. So it's not only bolsters the employee, but the family gets to see it, and it's an exciting thing. What else are you seeing that is working really well in terms of rewarding and recognizing people in the workforce?
Yeah, so I'll give you a good example of some of the stuff that you just mentioned, right? And so certainly if you're doing service award stuff, so length of service is important to that company, right?
Mhm.
So some places and some of the companies that I work with are high productivity technology companies, and service really isn't that important. More important is productivity and making sure that people are getting certified in the new technology so that they can bring to bear on the business higher productivity.
Yeah, right.
They spend a lot of money on things like paying for certifications. They spend a lot of things on sharing productivity increases with the different groups and things like that. So they spend a lot of time and energy on productivity rewards rather than things like service, right? So when I say connecting like the culture to the compensation, benefits, and reward strategy, that's an example of what I mean. And if service, meaning loyalty, is important to you, then yeah, pay for them. I kind of have a saying, pay for what you want. So you know what you want first in order to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so connecting those things, I think, is important. And where companies kind of fall flat, they do reward of the month. And the thing, ends up fizzling after a few months because people don't give it the attention that it deserves or something else. So I would say you don't have to have a lot of things, but the things that you have should be meaningful, should be tied to your culture, and should be well supported by the leaders, especially, and the workers. That's what I tell you.
Yeah. And I think like you said at the very beginning, is tying that back to your business strategy. So what is important to your business? What are your strategies, and how do those things play back into those? So John, thank you so much. I mean, this is, I think, been a great discussion. Hopefully it'll be, valuable to people to think about how to, these different elements and what to do differently that they might not be doing. And any closing comments as we close out today?
Yeah, I would tell you the main thing that you should keep in mind is that people are assets, and you should look at them that way and manage them that way as you would your financial assets, and that's really whoever's in charge of human resources or the people department in your company. That's what they should be doing, because you spend a lot of money on them. It's getting harder and harder to find, and so you really do need some thinking behind it in order to drive it, just like you would do your sales and marketing strategy. Is what I would tell you is important.
Yeah. So the last thing I'll say is, again, thank you for joining and having this conversation. And if for anybody out there who doesn't have these sort of things in place, leadership development, Vistage is a great opportunity, both from a CEO level all the way down to emerging leaders. You do phenomenal work in helping people in all aspects of this people capital and tying those to the business strategy. So please, anybody reach out to us. We'd love to have a conversation and just see how we can help you all. So have a great day, and thanks again for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you, Laurie.